What's up, my Yu-Gi Bros? I'm your host, the one, the only, the RJB0. Welcome to Yu-Gi-Oh! Business Casual. Today, I'm bringing you guys a deck profile for a deck I took to second place at Ice Age Games yesterday. Wasn't a spectacular performance, seeing as it was a fairly small tournament, but I really enjoyed the deck, and I was really impressed with how it played. The only match I lost to a really dumb misplay that I made, so I don't feel like it was really the deck's fault that I lost that match. It was really my fault. However, the deck was really fun, and it actually took a lot of skill, and I felt like I was using my best skill as a player when I was using this deck, and the deck is Dino Rabbit. Now, I understand that I said in a Casual Friday video a little while back that this deck is just totally dead, but then I did a little bit of research, and I found a video on Playmatter's channel of a version of this deck that went 9-0 at a box tournament during this format. Now, that version was not built to play against Shadows, so I modified this deck a little bit to be better against the Shadow matchup, and I think that it went brilliantly, and I just had a really great day playing this. Now, I'm sorry that I won't get to play this more this format. You'll see that I had to take it apart a little bit, but that's because there are a couple of fairly expensive cards that are going to get totally hammered by the ban list, so I had to get rid of them. I really love this deck, and if you have an event coming up before the ban list, if you really want to play something fun and skillful, I would highly recommend it. Let's get down to the deck list. We start off with the Dino Rabbit engine, your one Dino Rabbit, I wish 3 Dino Rabbit, your 3 Sabersaurus, and your 3 Cavazuls. Now, this engine is really cool. I actually really enjoyed it. I found that even though sometimes I did open with vanillas, in fact, I fairly often open with vanillas, I open with vanillas more often than I open with the rabbit, I didn't really mind, because these cards plus back row are really good this format because we don't deal with a lot of big beaters this format. You're playing against a lot of decks with a lot of really small main decked monsters. So these cards plus like Vanity's Emptiness or Artifact Sanctum are absolutely fine to draw this format, so I didn't worry about the fact that I had a bunch of vanillas in the deck and that I wasn't going to draw Rabbit as often as I was going to draw these. However, I did get a lot of access to Rabbit. I used Rabbit a ton, and it's because there's so many ways of digging for it in this deck. So that's kind of the heart and soul of the deck, but the real MVP of this deck yesterday was Jurak Guaiba. Guaiba, oh my goodness, it put in so much work, because the default plays this format tend to not leave a lot of large monsters on the board. With the exception of like Burning Abyss, which usually ends up with the Dante on the board in the opening turn, the decks this format, like Shadows, or Light Sworns, or Satellarknights, usually leave a fairly small monster on the board in the form of Deneb, or a set Shadow monster, or like a Raiden or a Lila or something, and those are things that you can get over with Jurak Guaiba and maybe a Lance. And if you can run over a Deneb with a Guaiba and then just like set up for a Lagia or a Dolka play, then you're in such good shape. This card actually put in a lot of work late game as well, because you'd end up in a fairly big grind game against a lot of these decks, and you could just poke away monsters that your opponent was using as defense. This card was absolutely amazing. Our next card, and the other half of the Dino Rabbit engine, is Tour Guide, and I ran the Skarm to boot. I shouldn't have to explain it. It is very self-explanatory, very, very pivotal to the engine. I'll explain the really big Wombo combo involving those cards later. Then we run 2 Moral Talk. I like the math of 2. I don't really like 3. I don't like the idea of drawing dead Moral Talks ever, so I try to make it so that I'm more likely to draw into Sanctums than Moral Talks. Moral Talk and Sanctum were just amazing in this deck, and they were a lot of how it did as well as it did. And then our final monster is Ryo, because Ryo is dumb, and if you open it with it an emptiness, you basically win the game. Let's move on to the spell cards. We start off with 3 Forbidden Lance, another MVP for this deck. The reason why this deck doesn't run a huge number of outs for things like Deltaros and El Shadal Winda is because Lance basically does the work for it. Winda is fairly small, so you can actually Lance a Winda and have it be under the attack of a Guaiba. So if your opponent attacks Guaiba with a Winda, you've got a Lance play ready. So you don't really need to run a huge amount of removal for things like Deltaros and Winda, because Lance basically puts in the work. The other nice thing about Lance is it can push through your Rabbit plays. So if your opponent tries to like breakthrough skill your Rabbit, or if they try to, Fiendish Chain your Tour Guide, you can push it through with a Lance, and it's just a really good card. Our next spell cards are 2 Pot of Duality. I didn't want it to clog, but it does give your deck a lot of consistency. Then you've got 2 MST. 2 just seems like the right number this format. I wouldn't run 3 because this deck doesn't lose as hard to Vanity's Emptiness as a lot of decks do. Then we've got 2 Soul Charge. I actually only used this card once in the entire day. There were times when it was kind of dead, but like having 2 is amazing because if you get any kind of Evilzar play, you can get back your monsters from your graveyard, your dinos, and then go into an Evilzar play. So I don't regret running 2 of this card. I sometimes sided it out depending on how many banishing cards I was siding in, but it was just generally a really good card. Considering taking out Dark Hole, I used it a few times, but it was pretty good. 1 Book of Moon, just a good card, really good to combo with Guaiba, and Gold Sarcophagus, which is really pivotal to the big Wombo combo that I'll show you at the end of this deck profile. We run for our traps 3 Artifact Sanctum. I had to sell 2 of them because I'm fairly certain either Mortal or Sanctum is going to get hit, and I don't want to be holding on to either of them when that happens. 2 Fiendish Chains. Fiendish Chain I like over Breakthrough Skill for this deck because it turned out that blocking my opponent's attacks was really critical because it allowed me to put multiple dinos on the board if I didn't draw Rabbit. That meant that I could go into an Evilzar play. And then we have 2 Vanity's Emptiness. This card put in so much work yesterday. Just under a Logia or something like that, like if I opened with a Rabbit play and Vanity's Emptiness, I basically won the game. And even under like one of your beaters like Ryo or Sabersaurus, this card is pretty darn good because it's tough for a lot of decks to get over monsters with 1900 attack if they can't special summon. And then finally, the one-ofs, Compulsory, Mirror Force, Torrential, Warning. So notice that I ran Mirror Force over D-Prison. Once again, there's so much removal for the cards that D-Prison is good against in this deck that I wasn't really afraid of D-Prison in any way. Or I didn't really need it, but Mirror Force was really cool because a lot of players are willing to overextend this format because they are unlikely to run into a Mirror Force and your opponent only has 1 Torrential. So if you use a Torrential, then your opponent's likely to overextend themselves, and when they do, you can drop that Mirror Force on them, and it's incredible. It allows you to keep your monsters for a turn, which once again allows you to go into an Evilzar play, which is amazing. I love Mirror Force, and I have a lot of cool Mirror Force theory that I made a video about not too long ago. I'll link you in the comments or in the description below. And then I ran Compulsory over Bottomless. I do not regret that decision in the slightest. Bottomless is a bad card this format because it doesn't work against Deltaros, it doesn't work against Winda, and the majority of decks this format don't summon a huge amount of main deck monsters with more than 1500 attack. So this card was actually really good, and I do not regret in the slightest running it over Bottomless. Let's move on to the extra deck. We've got, of course, 2 Logia, 2 Dolka, that's your Evilzar play, 2 Levier, 1 Zen Mines. This card is super underrated. This card put in just a ton of work yesterday. And then my rank 4s were Cowboy, 103, 101, 50, Castel, and Abyss Dweller. I also had a Daigusto Emerald and an Exciton Knight, neither of which I went into the entire day. The 2 cards that I actually used yesterday were 101 and Cowboy. The rest were the cards that I showed earlier. So the only thing that I would change about the extra deck is I might run Rhapsody and Berserk, just because I nearly died against Light Swarms. The relevant cards in the side deck, this deck's side deck is kind of savage. I absolutely love it. So you've got your anti-meta shit right here, your Dimensional Fissure and your Macrocosmos. So good. This lineup is so darn good. And then, of course, you can run your mirrors. I'm tempted to run 3 of each of them, and that's really the relevant stuff. You can side the hands against Boojins, which I did do. And I did also side Neospatian Grand Mole because I absolutely love the card, even if, maybe it isn't the best choice for the side deck. I just enjoyed it. Now, the really big combo that people are wondering about, the one that actually makes this deck viable this format, involves Tour Guide and Gold Sarcophagus. So I call it the Sarco-guide play because those are the two biggest cards in the play are Gold Sarcophagus and Tour Guide. So what you do is you start by summoning your Tour Guide and activating its effect. Now, the reason why you don't start off with Sarcophagus is you don't want your opponent to suspect what's going on. They only suspect that you have an Alucard play or a Zen Mains play, then they are less likely to Valor the Tour Guide. So you use the Tour Guide to summon Scar, and you overlay for Levier. So at this point, they're unlikely to get rid of the Levier because you don't really have any plays with the Levier, and they're probably assumed that either you misplayed or you just couldn't go into an Alucard play, especially if a player is inexperienced with playing against this deck. So what you do then is you go Sarco for Rabbit, and at this point, if they Valor your Leviar, you're A-okay because you've detached Skarm, which is going to get you another tour guide for another Leviar play at the end of the turn. If they don't Valor the Leviar, then you've got a Rabbit play this turn, and then you get a Rabbit play next turn because you have a Leviar. Even if that Leviar dies, you have another Leviar play set up. It is just nuts. So that is the deck. I really enjoyed it. I wish that I had a little more time to play around with it because I absolutely love it. However, it is going to get hammered pretty hard by the ban list due to likely hits to either Moral Talk or Sanctum and Vanity's Emptiness and Soul Charge. Other than that, I just really enjoyed the deck, and I hope you guys did too. If you did enjoy this video, do hit that thumbs up button. If you didn't, let me know why in the comments below. Of course, subscribe for more deck discussion, analysis, and general Yu-Gi-Oh! Shenanigans. I'm your host, the RJB0. Thank you guys for watching. I got a jet. See ya.